You're watching Morning at NTV.
Welcome back and thank you for staying with us right here in Morning at NTV. We're going to be talking about food security within the region, the locusts and COVID-19. Worried about a potential rise in food insecurity during the COVID-19 pandemic, many countries are making special efforts to keep agriculture safely running as essential business. Markets were supplied in affordable and nutritious food, and consumers are still able to access and purchase food despite the movement restrictions and income losses. However, there have been some gaps and efforts to plug them. To speak to us about this and more, we have Mr. Querido Antonio Luis Ferreira, the country representative of the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, and Mr. Dick Nwamanya, the president of Uganda Farmers Federation. They both join me right now in studio. Very good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on Morning at NTV.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me start with you, Mr. Antonio. How have you been able to continue with your mandate, which is helping people within East Africa and Africa as a whole, despite the whole COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you for the opportunity, and good morning to all your viewers.
Indeed.
As you know, agriculture is a time specific and weather dependent, and therefore agriculture practice as a whole has a potential to be affected by the pandemic, because we have a number of activities that really have to happen in sequence. The restriction of movement, the restriction of the supply chain and all the inputs needed in agriculture definitely have an impact on the sector. We as a UN system aware of the potential threat, together with our partners and the collectivity of UN agencies. We have launched an appeal, an emergency appeal, to ensure that the food security and nutrition is properly cared, knowing that full well that we do have challenges in the region, but also we have countries like Uganda that despite the potential challenge, the country agriculture sector and food production system is quite resilient. So the challenge for us going forward is how then we organize to ensure that food production, food distribution, and also access to market is not seriously affected or seriously impacted.
Of course, the Food and Agriculture Organization has warned that our vulnerable people within East Africa face a crisis within a crisis.
Definitely.
What does that exactly mean, coming from the Food and Agriculture Organization? And who are these needy people? How do we help them?
We know that 20% of the world hungry people, or the most vulnerable in terms of food security, is in this region of East Africa. And this region now is confronted by not only the pandemic, but also the locust. And we, in a number of them, we're having some cases of flood, landslide, really creating some stress in the food production system. Therefore, as we deal with this complex situation, we have to be mindful that the sector needs to secure food, because dealing with COVID, it is important that we continue to be well fed. So nutrition security is important. And the most vulnerable ones, we do have clear programs in terms of how we deal to ensure that we continue with the livelihood or providing support for the livelihood of those most affected.
And those people are the farmers who are trying to do the most, the hardest, the fishermen. And I also have the president of the Uganda Farmers Federation, that is Mr. Dick Nwamanya. You represent the farmers, but then we would like to know what is on the ground, what are the farmers going through, and how best can we help them?
Thank you very much, and good morning, viewers. And I'm pleased to be with you, our international partner in this struggle. Once again, my name is Dick Kamganga. I will a little bit provide some context on how we are here, and we're pleased for you to provide us this opportunity to be here. First and foremost, Uganda National Farmers Federation. This is an umbrella organization, the largest organization in the country that focuses on the farming sector. It was formulated in 1992 under the auspices of the Minister of Agriculture. By then, the Minister of Agriculture was Honorable Victoria Sechitereko, and it has a presence within the entire country, at least 135 districts. We have presence in 90 districts. We have 3 categories of membership. That is the mainstream district farmers associations, in which the members are the ordinary smallholder farmers and other farmers. Then we have commodity-specific membership. That is organizations that are focusing on specific value chain. One of our members, for instance, is New Cafe, which focuses on coffee, Hotexa, which focuses on horticulture. Then we have professionals that are working within the area of providing services like seed input producers, and as well as finance and microinsurance. Now, our main, the main mandate usually is 3 or 4. One is to mobilize and organize. The second is to empower. The third is to coordinate. We coordinate domestic partners, we coordinate regional partners, we coordinate international partners. And I'm pleased to, in this coordination, we have a complementary role with international partners like food and agriculture.
But at this point in time, help us paint a word picture. What is on the ground? We'd like to know the farmer.
Yes.
What are they going through during this trying time of COVID-19?
Yes. And not only COVID-19, you've mentioned the triple problem.
COVID-19, the locusts,
the locusts and the floods. You have seen what has happened. As newsmen, you know, news media house, you know what happened in the areas like Kasese. You know what has happened. So there is a systematic, impairment of the livelihood of the smallholder farm. Now, I will focus on the smaller, that is the 69, the subsistence ones, who have limited means of supporting themselves. And these 3 triple problems have aggravated their livelihood. Access, we are looking at, if you look at, as you mentioned, actually the key main 4 sectors, we are talking about crop, we are talking about livestock, we are talking about fisheries, and we are talking about agroforestry. All these key main sectors, the most harmed individual is the subsistence farmer, because of means of access to the inputs that would be supporting, either even if you look at the pre-production, the production, the handling of output, farm output, and the marketing, and all this through the chain is continuously disadvantaged. So what you are seeing, we have not been able, because of what the 3 mandates, mobilize and organize, you know, it's only me in the organization that is able to move. Wow. So therefore limited on mobilization.
Skeletal stuff.
Therefore limited to on assessment of the impact of these 3 triple problems. So we are yet to know the impact that it has gone down to this. But before COVID lockdown, we estimated between 25 and 40% of our smallholder farmers had not accessed the seeds, the inputs that are necessary for the production of the input. So that is the kind of impact we are looking at in the post assessment of what would happen. What we do predict, some parts of the country took advantage of the release of labor from schools and the like, the 15 million. Some parts didn't. Some parts had, because we have 10 ecological zones, agro-ecological zones. These 10 ecological zones, the season differs. Some parts had lost opportunity to plant because, for instance, pulses, we're going to have, beans were, the efforts to secure bean seeds was a little bit of a problem. So, but beans, pulses are essential component of smallholder subsistence household nutrition. So we anticipate a significant level of famine.
But the good thing, there is some help coming in courtesy of the Food and Agriculture Organization, the Emergency Locust Response Program from the World Bank. You're getting some $160 million US, 48 for Uganda. The farmers, whoever is affected, the livestock people, the fishermen, some help is coming, but we don't know when or at what time. But then I do have the country representative of the Food and Agriculture Organization, Mr. Antonio, help us understand the gravity of this situation. The report released by the Food and Agriculture Organization through the World Bank indicates that we are looking at a loss in crop and livestock production of $8.5 billion US. And the report also condemns if we do nothing to alleviate the effects of COVID-19, the locust invasion and the flooding, we might still be at a loss of $2.5 billion US. Help us understand what that means for the East African region.
The assessment that we have conducted,
yes.
You're right, the help of World Bank came based on the assessment done at the regional level by the FAO. We're looking at the Horn of Africa as a whole, and this is clear that the threat of the locust is quite serious for food security in the entire region. So we had to do something in terms of how we continue to monitor the situation, the surveillance, how we continue to respond, the spraying and control and suppress, and ensure that we don't have more generation of the locusts, but at the same time mindful of the livelihood of people. You know that these locusts, they have a very devastating impact on the vegetation. We're not only looking at the crop, but also the pasture. So it's critical that the response is addressed at the regional level. This cannot be only one country affair, because the locust does not respect the existing borders. So it has to be a joint effort. So all the resource that has been mobilized, either by ourselves, but also to the World Bank, is an effort to see how we tackle this, but in a very systematic way. Addressing the threat, ensuring that we control and we continue to monitor, ensure that we suppress the reproduction of locusts, but at the same time be mindful of the farmers, because we need to produce the food that we consume, and for this to happen, we really have to be mindful that we really have to suppress and be prepared for this threat. So this resource complements the effort globally, because the work that we do here in the Horn of Africa will also help the West Africa, because there is a potential threat for the locusts also to migrate to West Africa, to migrate to the Middle East, and all the way to India. So the collective work of all nations is to see how we continue to suppress the threat of locusts, at the same time be mindful of the livelihood. Most of the resources has been allocated in areas that I mentioned, with livelihood taking an important chunk of this resource, because it is important that we think of the people and address their needs.
Of course, during this period when we are dealing with a lot of heavy rain, you've come out as Food and Agriculture Organization to actually advise farmers to desist from planting, because we are dealing with the locust invasion, fresh locusts that might eat that plantation, first of all, and we're also dealing with the issue of floods. You're going to plant, and then the water is going to come and wash all that food away. But then there's been contradicting statements from the government, which says, of course, farmers should continue with their farming practices to increase or protect food security within the region, which is something that might actually pose a danger to our farmers, because we are talking about the first batch of the locusts that came in within February. You had the second one coming in, but that's the old batch. Yes. That batch was very old. They were
old, then
almost 6 months old.
Not as destructive.
Yes. But then we are dealing with the fresh batch that came through April 3rd. Yes, this fresh batch, these are young locust nymphs that eat the size of their body weight, and this has actually coincided with the harvest period, June and July. How dire is the situation? Aren't we dealing with a food insecurity crisis if these locusts actually start eating all this food?
Then the importance of response. As you have realized, we've been quite effective responding to the threat. As the swarm arrived, the work we have in place, both with the MAIF, but also the support from UPDF, has been critical to ensure that we continue to respond. Because we have to suppress. It is an infestation that needs an active response to ensure that you suppress the level of destruction. Of course, you do have some impact, damage and it is important that we compensate this damage to the farmer and to ensure that whatever they lose, the state and the support comes to really to match and to ease the damage. But it's critical for us to have a system of response. We have in place a stockpile of the needed pesticide to ensure that as the swarm arrive, we're active in place, responding to suppress. But as you know, this also depends on the effort in Kenya, the efforts in Ethiopia in suppressing the locusts, because we know most of the reproduction is happening in Somalia, in Kenya, and Ethiopia. We are receiving the swarms that are coming this way because they are moved by the wind. Then it is also important that Uganda have the readiness and be able to respond in time to minimize the damage. In places that we do have the damage, we have an assessment also in place to make an assessment of the loss and damage, to be able to provide the right compensation to the farmers that lost either their crop or their pasture, and to ensure that we have a response in terms of the livelihood that really compensate not only the threat but also the actual damage of the locusts in these regions.
I also noticed that you mentioned Somalia being the bedrock of all these locusts, where they're coming from, the fact that they're near the Sahara Desert and all that, the fact that they had heavy rains last year, and the fact that that has been a conducive environment for these locusts to continue breeding. But then the issue of spraying in Somalia, the region that has been a problem for us, Al-Shabaab has exacerbated the problem. So how would you actually continue to eliminate, how would you continue to eliminate this threat from Somalia if we are not spraying in those areas? We are going to get into that. But then Dick Nwamanye, I would like to know, how have women, who are the biggest champions of smallholder agriculture, if you talk about subsistence, you're talking about women who are at home. So how have they been affected by this whole COVID-19? Now you have the floods and the locusts.
Thank you. You are very right. The largest proportion of our membership and the largest producers of food in the country are women and children. Ironically, I speak children in front of a UN diplomat. That would be surprising, but these are the champions. We have households that are led by teenagers in the country, and as of now, their voice to be able to access to influence the restrictions is difficult. We know of some families of subsistence youth or children-led families now are currently suffering. If you go outside the outskirts of Kampala, they cannot convince an RDC to give them permits to move from one place to another. When you analyze the value chain, the production value chain, you're going to talk about the pre-planting. At pre-planting, there is a preparation, there is requirements that are needed to be able to fulfill that goal. It's the same with production. You have management of the plant, management of that requires specific inputs, and then the production in itself, the actual output. All these stages, when you speak of women and youth who have a limited voice to influence how they do their work in amidst restrictions, amidst floods, the effect is very immense in midst of stress. But we also know in informal businesses in the country, almost 90% of our employment is provided by informal businesses, and almost 90% or at least 65% of the informal business are food-oriented businesses. Yes. And those food-oriented businesses, if you go to Karerwa, you go where they are driven by women. That's where they earn their income. That's where they earn their livelihood. That's where they earn money to be able to provide food and nutrition at household level. That's what they provide us decent jobs in inverted commas. And now, in the current situation where you don't move from one point to another, either to acquire an input, move from one point to another, either to acquire seeds to plant, move one point to another to either to acquire finance. And you also know that the issue, because we have three main problems for me as I look at it on the farmer's perspective, my experience I've seen, the inputs, the knowledge, and the finance. Those three things at the current moment, banks withdrew, even village banks cannot work. Even savings groups are not working properly. Then the mainstream banks, they always shun away from us. So it is a huge problem for women, the most vulnerable. In fact, I thank the role of FAO and the UN agencies which are doing the coordination at national, regional, and international level to look at the ways, the mechanism of influencing the livelihood of these vulnerable people, and call upon, of course, the government to reflect on how an innovative mechanisms in which we can deliver support to these smallholder farms.
Of course, the good thing is, and the good news is that the Food and Agriculture Organization already came through $48 million to our people right here.
Yep.
Alleviate poverty and also support smallholder farmers, and also the circles. It's not only just agriculture, horticulture, or anything like that. It's just improving the livelihoods. I read the report and I was so happy. But then you're here, Mr. Antonio. You've been doing something great in the northeastern parts of Uganda. I'm talking about Karamoja, Amudat, and the rest. You've been fighting the locusts, so we would like to know, how have you been progressing with that fight from your perspective?
The locust fight has been, the assessment so far is quite positive. As you know, we were able to train more than 2,000 agents of UPDF, equip them with the right protection and give the right supply together with MAIF, but also together with MAIF ensure that the right the amount of pesticides to respond. So I think in terms of the response mechanisms in place to deal with the locust, definitely Uganda is continue to build the capacity to really suppress the threat, and we are mindful of the fact that Karamoja is an area that, despite its potential for food production, is still an area where we have pockets of food insecurity. Therefore, the role of FAO, together with the government, but with our partners, is to see then how we make an in-depth assessment of the situation now. As the head of Farmers Association mentioned, it is important that we do an impact assessment. We have initiated a qualitative socio-economic impact assessment to really have an understanding of the situation of COVID situation impact on food production system, and come up with the right decisions to ensure that Uganda use agriculture sector as a way out of this crisis. Because we do have the potential to produce the food. Our challenge is then how we organize it, particularly looking forward to the second season in a way that we don't forget the small ones. Not only for subsistence, but looking at agriculture sector in the context of the whole continent. We do have the capacity and the potential to really increase our production and look beyond supplying food for the nation. But it's critical, as he mentioned, that we organize the production, but we organize the post-harvest, because we know that most of the effort of our farmers sometimes is lost to the post-harvest, huge post-harvest loss, and then how we connect to markets. We know that the COVID restriction of movement has impacted on small ones. You and I, we have changed our habits in terms of going to the market. The supply of fresh produce now is impacted. People tend to now to store and stock food. This has an impact on the prices.
Yes.
So we have to look at all this impact and put in place policies that are really minimize this impact, but at the same time be forward-looking, because you're going to have the potential. It is the food basket of this Africa.
Amazing. Of course, you're talking about the triple threat, which is COVID-19, the floods, and the locusts. Let's revert our attention to the floods. The floods have actually caused a lot of damage within the East African region. We are talking about 300 lives being lost as a result of the flash floods. People don't even realize that so many people have been lost. 300. And 500,000 people, 500,000, have been displaced as a result of the floods. So, Dick Nwamanya, help me understand how the floods have negatively impacted our farmers, the herders, and the people in this sector.
First, you correctly in your introductory remarks made that it has destroyed the crops. Second, it has disrupted the seasonal orientation of production. Third, you destroyed homes and the like. So all these compound into a potential food insecurity in the coming months or so. Because if you can imagine 300 individuals losing their lives, 500,000 being displaced, you are looking at labor for production out, predictability of what is going to come next out. Many parts of the region. If you go to Kasese, for instance, right now, you understand how the destruction has caused so many, and even almost every part of, even in eastern Uganda. So some of the staples that we are producing in those parts of the country will not be sufficiently produced in the next season. So we negatively impacted.
Mr. Antonio, what opportunities are there post COVID-19 to actually reorient food systems?
I think it's an opportunity for all nations for us to think differently when it comes to all the food web and food production system. Uganda has is lucky in this aspect because its production system is less dependent on the international market. So the initial assessment, we have some commodities, yes, like coffee, sugarcane. Those are maybe affected by the dynamics at the international level. But internally, we think that the production system is resilient enough because it's diversified. So the challenge for the production system in Uganda is then how we look at this as an opportunity for us to reinvent and put resources. He spoke about the financing to mechanize, to become more efficient, and to really be more competitive in terms of food production production system, because it's critical, the competitiveness aspect.
Mr. Dick Nwamanya, as the president of the Uganda National Farmers Federation, what are some of the lessons you've learned from this COVID-19 pandemic?
The first one, based on the first context I provided you, is that we have to evolve as an organization. We also have to evolve as a farm system support. As a government, we have to evolve. Lockdown has indicated that basically a new life will be led by technology. I see digitization, for instance, digitization of our farm activities is going to be very important. Probably with ability to correct data, location data, farm data, enterprise data, indicating where a farmer is, including predictability of what catastrophe is going to. Of course, you wouldn't predict, you wouldn't be able to predict COVID, where it's going to come from, but you could predict the impact of floods on us. And this is going to be more reliant on the data. So if we move to digital strategies that allows us to access our farmers. For the moment, I have an opinion on, for instance, on the relief support that are being offered around to the vulnerable society. I thought if we probably had digital data, we would do cash transfers. Cash transfers would be more effective in supporting the farmer output from the farm to be marketed here rather than procure posho for a few individuals. So cash transfers, if we did, but this needed to be supported with digital data on individuals. So that's number one I've seen as a lesson. Evolve as a nation and as an organization. Let's evolve and move into the digital space of managing our lives.
Dick Nwamanya, the president of the Uganda National Farmers Federation, and Mr. Antonio Karidos is the country representative of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. The conversation has been centered around the issue of the triple threat, the locusts, the flooding, and COVID-19. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for having made the time to speak to us.
Thank you very much for your
I'm sure you're wondering right now, if you're watching Morning at NTV, how did we get to this position? Why are we seeing big swarms of locusts? Why are we seeing all this? Well, it's because of the heavy rains and climate change within Somalia and the fact that Somalia is grappling with Al-Shabaab. So most of the places where the breeding of the locust is taking place, the East African Locust Control Organization cannot go to those places to spray, because if the Al-Shabaab see any plane in their territory, they're going to shoot it down. So that's why you still have those swarms making their way to Kenya, Ethiopia, and finally in Uganda. But there is also trouble that they might go all the way to Nigeria, Chad, and Niger. So that's why the World Bank decided through this emergency locust response program to release at least $500 million to help people around the world. Uganda is getting the East African region is getting 160 million of those dollars. 48 will go to Uganda, 43 to Kenya, 63 to Ethiopia. Somalia and Yemen are out of the picture because of the problems that they are dealing with, political instabilities. You're still watching Morning at NTV. Let's take a short break. We'll be right back.